welcome to today's Daily Chronicle. Today is Thursday, March 27th, 2025. Trump announces new 25% tariff on imported cars and car parts. President Trump announces tariffs on auto imports in the Oval Office on Wednesday. President Trump said on Wednesday that he will impose 25% tariffs on imported cars and car parts starting next week, using his national security powers to take action. I think our automobile business will flourish like it's never flourished before, Trump said in remarks from the Oval Office. The United Auto Workers Union praised the move, saying it could mean more shifts for workers at plants with spare capacity. The latest policy is yet another example of the president's tariff-centric second-term economic agenda. Thus far, Trump has imposed tariffs on Chinese goods, steel and aluminum, and some goods from Canada and Mexico. Mexico is by far the largest exporter of auto parts in the U.S., followed by Canada, China, Japan, and South Korea. According to Commerce Department data, the list of the biggest vehicle exporters is similar. Mexico far outstrips other countries, followed by Japan, South Korea, Canada, and Germany. The tariffs under the USMCA, a trade agreement ratified during Trump's first term, would be more complicated. Cars imported under the USMCA will be tariffed only on their non-US continent, the White House said. In addition, the administration is still deciding how to tariff auto parts imported under the USMCA. An administration official told reporters. The tariffs not only on cars, but car parts could have complex effects on the automobile supply chain. As NPR has reported, car parts can cross borders multiple times as a car is assembled. Auto industry analysts told NPR earlier this month that they expect these tariffs to raise car prices for U.S. consumers. Foreign automakers blasted the new tariffs. The tariffs imposed today will make it more expensive to produce and sell cars in the United States, ultimately leading to higher prices. Fewer options for consumers and fewer manufacturing jobs in the U.S., said Jennifer Savabian, CEO of Auto Drive America, a group that represents companies including BMW, Hyundai, and Toyota. Trump also plans to waive what is called reciprocal tariffs, to be announced on April 2nd, which he has called Liberation Day. The taxes on imports have caused plummeting stock market and consumer confidence, and have left businesses and consumers uncertain about what they want to invest in. The Trump administration has given multiple rationales for these tariffs, but has emphasized boosting manufacturing as their chief goal. U.S. tariffs are paid to the government by businesses in the U.S. tax that are importing goods. Studies of tariffs imposed in Trump's first term have shown they are overwhelmingly paid by U.S. businesses and consumers. White House officials have said that foreign companies will lower their prices to compensate for tariffs, essentially eating the cost. However, when asked by NPR, the officials provided no data to support this. Trump's tariff policy has been chaotic throughout his presidency. In addition, the tariffs already imposed, he has threatened still more tariffs on a range of goods from around the world, at times announcing a tariff only to then delay or retract it. This week, Trump floated what he called a secondary tariff of 25% on goods from any country buying oil or gas from Venezuela. The White House has given specific details on what to expect next week when Trump announces reciprocal tariffs, though Trump said on Wednesday that they would be more lenient and conservative than some might expect. Doge says it needs to know the government's most sensitive data, but can't say why. White House advisor Elon Musk, at a cabinet meeting at the White House on Monday. Musk, who is also the CEO of SpaceX and Tesla, is leading the Department of Government Efficiency effort that is trying to access data from the government to find waste, fraud, and abuse. Fewer than 50 people have access to Social Security Administration databases containing hundreds of millions of people's private, financial, and personal information, but also has access to the government's humane resources and student loan files. Akash Boba is one of many of the Department of Government Efficiency staffers who have embedded in federal agencies the last few months with virtually unfettered access to the sensitive, compartmentalized sources of data collected by the government. The team, which is steered by billionaire Elon Musk, says it's scouring the government records for signs of waste, fraud, and abuse. Boba is one of many of Doge employees who, according to several federal judges, were inappropriately given the access in violation of privacy laws and without proper training to handle the personally identifiable information the agencies collect. In one order last week, blocking Doge's access to Social Security data, U.S. District Judge Ellen Lipton Hollander of Maryland said the government never identified or articulated even a single reason for which the Doge team needs unlimited access to SSA's entire record systems, thereby exposing personnel, confidential, sensitive, and private information that millions of Americans entrusted to their government. Instead of a more narrow approach to data access and work to modernize the system and uncover fraud, Hollander wrote that Doge's unprecedented access to protected data is tantamount to hitting a fly with a sledgehammer. An NPR review of thousands of pages of records across more than a dozen lawsuits in federal court finds an alarming pattern across agencies, where Doge has conflicting information about what data it has access to, who has that access, and most importantly, why. No need to know. When President Trump signed an order creating the DOGE initiative, it directed agencies to create dedicated teams that would have full and prompt access to all unclassified agency records, software systems, and IT systems that would also adhere to rigorous data protection standards. Numerous court filings and affidavits paint a picture of agencies rushing to give DOGE access without accompanying rigor of protecting data or documenting the scope of its work. On Monday, a federal judge in Maryland temporarily halted DOGE from accessing data of millions of union members in a lawsuit against the Office of Personnel Management, the Treasury Department, and Education Department, after finding the agencies shared private information with DOGE affiliates who had no need to know the vast amount of sensitive information, personal, to which they were granted access. No matter how important or urgent the president's DOGE agenda may be, federal agencies must execute in accordance with the law. Judge Deborah L. Boardman wrote, "That likely did not happen in this case." In the Social Security Administration lawsuit, Hollander found several DOGE staffers were granted access to SSA systems before their background checks were completed or their interagency details agreements were finalized. One of those is Boba, who was given access to the master data warehouse at SSA that includes the master beneficiary record, supplemental security record, and numerated files containing extensive information about anyone with a social security number, according to filings in the case. According to a memorandum of understanding detailing Boba's work with SSA, the Office of Personnel Management and Education Department that was improperly redacted by OPM, the Boba agreed to do any work on Social Security data from the agency headquarters. But an affidavit from the former SSA Chief of Staff, Tiffany Flick, said that Boba was working off-site from OPM, where people may have also had access to this protected information. Flick wrote, "Not even lawyers for the government can account for when and how DOGE staffers received access to sensitive databases." In a Labor Department lawsuit, Judge John D. Bates notes that defendants themselves acknowledging inconsistencies across their evidence regarding DOGE. Marco Elez, a DOGE employee who resigned from his post at the Treasury Department in early February after racist social media posts resurfaced, sent an email with a spreadsheet containing PI to two United States General Services Administration officials, according to an audit of his email account submitted in one court filing. Government lawyers said Elise was erroneously and mistakenly given the ability to change data on Treasury's secure payment system, which a judge said demonstrates DOGE access was rushed and undertaken by political pressure. In a ruling blocking DOGE to access to Treasury systems, Judge Jeanette Vargas warned that a real possibility exists that sensitive information has already been shared outside of the Treasury Department in potential violation of federal law. Congress warned against this a half-century ago, when Congress passed the Privacy Act of 1974 lawmakers expressed concerns about personal information amassed in digital databases by the omnivorous fact collectors of federal agencies. During the debate about the bill, Arizona Republican Senator Barry Goldwater was worried about the possibility that every detail of our personal lives can be assembled instantly for use by a single bureaucrat or institution. I hope that we never see the day when a bureaucrat in Washington or Chicago or Los Angeles can use organizations' computer facilities to assemble a complete dossier or all known information about an individual, Republican Senator Charles Percy said. 50 years later, the Department of Government Efficiency effort, headed by Musk, appears to be doing just that. Bypassing the Privacy Act, agent security protocols, and training for handling the most sensitive data maintained by federal agencies. The White House did not respond to questions about DOJ following privacy laws, or whether Americans should be concerned about the levels of DOJ's access. The federal government maintained a large amount of sensitive data from health records of veterans and Medicare recipients to troves of information about companies being investigated by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the National Labor Relations Board. The rapid insertion of DOJ employees into the system is raising alarm bells for privacy and security advocates. The government has also repeatedly failed to articulate a clear purpose for the unprecedented access it seeks to deeply sensitive information, and why the data it wants access to is necessary for that purpose, said Kristen Wolfell, a lawyer with the nonprofit Center of Democracy and Technology. If the government cannot answer those questions, then DOJ has no business accessing that data. Part of what is unnerving and is scary, both to companies whose data is involved, and also Americans whose most sensitive financial information is at risk, is that we don't know what they're doing. Former SFPB chief technologist Erie Meyer previously told NPR. Ann Wiseman, a Georgia University law school professor who focuses on government and accountability and transparency, said DOJ and its employees have control over a staggering amount of data about Americans. It's so ironic because Trump supporters are so worried about Big Brother and government, and they're allowing this entity to amass that data. Wiseman said, I don't think there's another entity in the federal government that collectively has access to that kind of data. Wiseman is also outside counsel for the nonprofit Project on Government Oversight, which is suing DOJ over access to records about how it operates. Last week, Trump signed an executive action that appears to continue to push agencies toward eliminating information silos and sharing more sensitive data across federal agencies, including ensuring that the government has unfettered access to all unemployment data and related payment records. It encourages federal agency leaders to find ways to rescind existing regulations and guidance about information sharing within and between agencies, with no mention of privacy or data security. Why don't diving seals drown? Scientists finally have an answer. Chris McKnight has spent much of his career studying the physiology of seals. But in 2019, the ecologists decided to test a new instrument for gathering data underwater on another kind of swimming mammal, humans, at the Freediving World Championships. He was shaken by what he saw. In the first day, 3 divers blacked out underwater. So basically, ran too low on oxygen. Lost consciousness, he said. To me, that was quite jarring to observe. But for the freedivers, it was like, oh, that just happens. It's a thing. It's a thing because freedivers can trick the body into thinking it has more air than it does by hyperventilating. That clears the system of carbon dioxide, a gas that builds up when we hold our breath and that triggers the urge to breathe. Seeing the human divers black out so often prompted McKnight to ponder something he hadn't really thought about in eels. In seals, what keeps them from encountering a similar fate and drowning? In a study in the journal Science, McKnight and his colleagues report that they have found the answer. Seals can directly perceive how much oxygen is circulating in their body and act accordingly. It's the first time such an ability has been observed in an animal, the researchers say. The paper was really well done, said Michael Tift, a biologist at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. It's a little bit of a surprising result, but actually, it's also not that surprising. Tift is not that surprised because of how seals process carbon dioxide. When most mammals hold their breath, CO2 builds up in the bloodstream. If animals don't breathe to dispel CO2, concentrations of the gas can become harmful, which is why CO2 levels, not oxygen levels, generally trigger the urge to breathe. But in marine mammals, you don't really see an increase in CO2 in the blood because they have ways to essentially get rid of it, he said, ultimately helping them stay underwater longer. So it makes sense that seals would track oxygen levels instead, said Tift, but it has been really hard to demonstrate. It's just very difficult to work with these animals and to do studies to address specific questions. To figure it out, McKnight and his colleagues at the University of St. Andrews Sea Mammal Research Unit had to get creative. They built an experimental setup where wild-caught seals would breathe in a special pyramid-shaped air chamber, just big enough for a single seal's head. After, the seals would forage for food in an enclosed pool. In the pyramid, the team exposed the seals to different air mixtures: ambient air, high and low levels of oxygen, and high levels of CO2. Then they tracked how long the seals stayed underwater. All told, they monitored 6 seals for more than 500 individual dives. If the seals were tracking oxygen levels, you'd expect the high oxygen treatment to yield longer dives, and the low oxygen treatment to yield shorter ones. That's exactly what the researchers found. In contrast, the seals didn't really change their diving behavior in response to CO2, even when it was 200 times ambient levels. That was a real surprise, because it has such a strong perceptual effect on most animals, said McKnight. These results suggest seals can cognitively perceive their internal oxygen levels and make decisions about how long to stay underwater based on that information. How their brains and bodies pull this off is another question, McKnight said, one that would need further study. Still, he has some ideas. All mammals have the physiological ability to measure both oxygen and CO2 in their bodies, and essentially use the same hardware to do it. McKnight said, it's the software, so to speak, that may change from species to species. We think there's potentially a reconfiguration of how that information is processed, rather than changes in hardware, he said, with information about oxygen getting routed to cognitive decision-making areas for the brain. Given that shared hardware, McKnight thinks this ability might extend to other diving animals, or perhaps even reptiles and birds that have evolved to make a living underwater. We think there might be a broad convergent evolution of this trait, he said, since all face the same issue. If you run out of oxygen, you'll drown.